Scares and screams and things unseen. It's the Scare Factor Podcast, Season 3.
What's going on, everybody? Brian here with the Scare Factor Podcast. Welcome back to the second best podcast, according to ChatGPT. I am joined this week by Tiphennie yet again. Tiphennie, how's it going?
It's going pretty good.
That's good. What'd you do today?
I ended up going to a lovely picnic with a bunch of friends.
That sounds wonderful. I am also joined this week by Joanna, who is also of Team Zombillies. That's a name we haven't heard in a long time on this podcast. Joanna, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am great. What did you do today?
I went to Kings Island.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
I want to go to Kings Island. Take me with you next time.
Well, we have a platinum pass, so we go there regularly to use our food plan. So that's what we did.
Well, you get those
Nice.
Bring a Friend passes, right?
Oh, yeah.
I'm your friend.
Come up or come down or wherever, however.
I'll figure it out. I'll show up at your house one day. We're going to Kings Island. Today we are talking about good touch, bad touch, haunts that get touchy-feely. Where is the line? Where does it need to be drawn? And what should a haunt disclose to you before you go? Any thoughts before we start getting into this?
No, I'm ready to jump right in.
Same here. Just talking about touch haunts. There's all kinds of different kinds, so.
Yes. My thought on touching in haunts is if it doesn't feel good, move the actor's hand until it does. So, we're going to start this off with types of touching. And I know what you're thinking, and no, we're not going there. So, the first type of touch that we're going to talk about is light touch. This is going to be the sort of touching you experience at a mom and pop sort of place. There's not really any nationally known places that do this. You could probably think of a whole bunch locally that do this. We're talking about shoulder taps, playing with your hair, light caressing. This is going to be the sort of actor that comes up to you that's dressed as a hillbilly, strokes your hair and goes, "You smell like the inside of my mama's purse." Beyond that, they're not really doing a whole lot to you. Locally for me, I've gone to Demon Acres, who does that. Terror Field does the same sort of thing. What about you guys? Is there anything local to you that does that light touch?
I could think of one, or it used to. They didn't open like last year, but before, we had a haunt, and it's one of those like hooded experiences. So you have a hood over your head and you go through this like path. You have this like rope or chain or whatever that kind of leads you like through this room. And then actors like interact with you by touching you and kind of like playing with you or like picking up your hand or whatever. A lot of that tends like I've been to 2 different places, and both of my experiences with them have been like that's the type of like light touching. Like you could tell that they're there or if they're like hovering around you, but they actually don't really touch you too much. I don't know where tickling falls in the spectrum, but I've definitely been like tickled before, which is like slightly more, but I wouldn't consider it medium touch either because again, it's in jest. So yeah, that's kind of my experiences with haunts that have this like light touch feature.
Depending on the person, I think tickling may actually fall under the extreme category.
I mean, yeah, I could see that. I mean, this wasn't aggressive tickling. It was like, I don't know, like going for the stomach, going.
Okay.
It's not that bad.
Joanna, what about you?
Yeah, I was going to say, I have the similar experiences. Sometimes there's like, I feel like the haunts where they have the younger actors and actresses will do this versus, I mean, if it's a more aggressive thing, they might have it, it won't be kids, but like there'd be actors that'll come up and kind of stroke your hair, like grab your, not grab it, but just kind of like barely put their finger, play with your hair. We've had things where they like an over the top, like they're overhead and they'll come down and like maybe just touch your shoulder or something or touch the top of your head. some similar to that. There's haunts around here that do that. Just try not to cross the line of actually grabbing or pulling you. But yeah, similar to what Tiff said.
Okay, so I think we all have a pretty good idea of the type of haunt that does this sort of thing. So if we go a little bit beyond that, we're going to get into this medium touch sort of category. And this is still going to be very, very non-aggressive. It's going to be non-aggressive grabbing or light shoving. They may grab a hold of your shoulders to turn you, to redirect you into a different scene than the rest of your group. I think in this sense, it's going to be more along the lines of how the Penn State Penn haunt used to run before the new owners got involved and the new management and all that, because they changed a lot of things over the last few years. But as I recall, the way it used to be, they would touch you, and it was this level of touching. Again, this is going to be much more rare than light touch and much more aggressive touching, and I'm not really sure why, to be honest with you. We're going to get into why actually later, but...
Okay, because I was like, what do you mean, like, you don't understand why? Like, kind of like the step up, but if we're going to talk about it later.
Yeah, it's... A lot of it just comes down to insurance, but it's... I find it interesting that you'll have a bunch of haunts locally that'll do this light touching, shoulder taps, playing with your hair, whatever, and then the next step up from that is probably going to be the next thing, and this is... I'm calling this heavy petting. And this is going to be like Haunted Hoochie level, right? They're going to forcefully grab you. They might drag you out of a scene. You might actually get bruised, right? And there's going to be some nationally known names that do this. Hoochie is one of them. I struggle to think of another off the top of my head, but these are generally going to be bigger haunts that bring in a lot more money because they're paying for insurance that allows them to do this. Have either of you guys been to a haunt that does this sort of thing? Joanna, I think you've said you've been to Hoochie before.
Yeah, I've been to Hoochie. Another haunt around our area that does this kind of is the Haunted Hotel in Louisville. They're known for being very physical. But yeah, I would say it would be, my experiences have been kind of a mix of medium to heavy. Because there's been times where, like I referred to the Haunted Hotel, that they would actually grab you and, they would drag you and throw you around, throw you up against the wall, stuff like that. But then there's some times where they'll just grab you in the arm. And same at Hoochie. Like, I've been through where they've been super touchy, and sometimes, it might be a little bit more on the medium side. So I think it just depends on the show and the actor and who's doing it. But I think the bruising part, I don't think that they intentionally want to bruise you. I think it's just something that might accidentally happen, because, they're going to, if they're shoving you around, you basically are going to run into something and you'll get bruised. So exactly. I don't think they want to bruise you. They're just, the show is so intense that they might get into it and you might run into something like a prop or who knows, and you can get bruised. So, yeah.
It's a risk you take at this level of interaction, especially if they're forcefully grabbing a hold of you. If an actor just happens to grab you in the right way, just hard enough, that act alone may leave a small bruise. Or they may end up pushing you into a wall, which could bruise you pretty good. But again, it's a risk that you understand. And at this level, we're talking about waivers that are being signed usually. And this is where we start getting into the realm of, do you have to sign a waiver? At what point should you sign a waiver? And we also get into the discussion of disclosure. And there's a difference between saying you may be touched, and there's a difference between that and you will absolutely be touched aggressively. And I think Hoochie tells you up front, we're going to touch you. Yeah. And it ain't going to be nice.
Yeah. They have signs outside that say it before you go in. Like, right when you get on the property, they're like, we're going to touch you. We don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hoochie's a whole beast on its own. But yeah, it's disclosure in any of these is very important. All the way from that light touch where on their website they'll tell you you might be touched, but it's not going to be painful. Nothing's really going to happen to you. It's going to be the sort of thing where you might experience more physical interaction going to a concert, getting into a mosh pit.
Oh, for sure.
I've come out of mosh pits with a lot of bruises before.
Yeah, I got a bloody nose at Slipknot, so it's what it is.
I gave someone a bloody nose at Slipknot.
Oh, then you did it.
It was me. It's me. I'm the problem. So as we move on from heavy petting, we get into the world of extreme touch and extreme haunts. Now, this is where waivers are absolutely 100% being used before you attend. If you're not signing a waiver before you attend a haunt like this, there's a lot of problems going on, and you should not be going to that haunt. They should also be disclosing to you explicitly the sorts of things that are going to happen to you, whether that's open hand hitting, like slapping you in the face, pulling your hair, hitting you with cattle prods, electrocuting you, simulated drowning. This is at a point where you take the risk of actually bleeding, right? And it's not going to be because they intentionally make you bleed, although some of them might. We might get into that a little later. Depends on how I feel. But this is where a risk of actually getting really injured becomes a risk you need to understand. So some examples of extreme haunts that will do this. The Freakling Brothers, The Victim Experience. Now, they're not doing it currently. I don't think they've done it since 2020 because they shut it down due to COVID. But that's a show where it's simulated that you're kidnapped and murdered. And from what I understand, they do a very good job of making you believe it. Some other famous extreme haunts from around the country, Blackout, which has received a lot of news, both good and bad. Hurting, they've done a bunch of different stuff. Back in season 1, we talked about extreme haunts, and Hurting was one that we talked about quite a bit. If you're looking for any level of this, and you want this immersive sort of haunted house experience, one of the resources that I use is haunting.net. And I know this is going to sound like an ad. Trust me, it's not. They're not paying me a dime. Their website's actually really nice because it shows you everything from level 0, what they call level 0, and that's not touching you. You are purely a spectator, all the way up to, I think, a level 10, where, again, the victim experience. You are physically being put in compromising positions. You are going to get hurt. So with all that being said, what other haunts can you guys think of that use various levels of touch that listeners around the country might know of?
I think in my area, so it's not really that common to have a touch haunt. Like, I ran into one up in Canada, British Columbia, and then we had one in Portland. The one in Portland actually, I believe, would fall in that medium touch category. It was very like, I mean, I was, when I went ahead and went through, I was picked up, like I was behind following my group, and then I was picked up and then turned and then put down in like an opposite direction type of thing. But I went ahead and like talked to, the director and some of the cast after I got out. And I was like really impressed at like how, even though it was like a contact haunt, it wasn't like incredibly physical. Like it wasn't like them hurting you or doing that. And I was just curious of like, well, I mean, maybe it was just because I wasn't fighting back. Like, is that a natural fear reaction for people to like fight back? And that's how it escalates. But when I was talking to the director and that, it was led by this like amateur wrestler. And so they had a whole bunch of like the wrestling hold moves that they kind of used that wasn't really like meant to hurt. the other person. It's just like to redirect them or move them and like kind of produce a show, like to do a performance. And I thought that was just a really interesting concept of, being able to run a haunt. So
I like the idea of using those, kind of entertainment wrestling moves, because
Right.
if you're ever put in a headlock by one of those guys who knows what they're doing, it's quite soothing. Joanna, what about you? Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, where I live, kind of in Ohio Valley area, we have the two popular ones are Haunted Hoochie, of course, in Columbus, Ohio, which we've already talked about, and Haunted Hotel, which is in Louisville, Kentucky. Other haunts I can think of, it's interesting. The touch haunts here, they used to be either you're getting touched or not, but some of them have went to a system where you might, if you want to be touched, you either pay extra or they'll have, like, you wear a glow, like, necklace or something. So there's a haunt that I was just thinking of in Springfield, Ohio, called Face Your Fears Hotel Terror. And they have that option where if you want to be touched, you would wear like a glow necklace. And they kind of it's a medium. They might separate you from your group. They'll grab you on your arm, might grab your leg, something like that. Grab your hair. Other haunts I can think of, Fear Fair in Seymour, Indiana. They were always notorious touch haunt, and I actually worked at that haunt, so I got to be on the other side of being able to learn what kind of touch you can do at a haunt and what you can't do. And of course, in my kind of where I was working, I was a victim. I was actually in a Michael Myers room where I was a victim. So he would take me and he would we pretend slam me into a furnace, and I would pretend to be knocked out, but then I would be like, kind of like, help me. And I could sit there and say, help me or whatever and look like I'm hurt. But then when I grab somebody, they weren't expecting that. And that would get them scared, because being a victim in a haunt, you don't really get scares unless you're quiet and you scream, you might startle somebody. But when I, kind of slightly grab them on their leg, they'd be like, holy crap, I wasn't expecting that. So those are the top 4 in my area I can think of. And then the only extreme example I was thinking of, and I think I've talked about this, but I watched the reality show about the 17th door in California. I think it's in the Los Angeles area, but they had like an electrocution room where they like shock you. It was like a shocking room, and they simulated drowning. I mean, they did like a latex wall that would come down on you and pretend. I mean, I'm severely claustrophobic. I could not do the latex wall, but other things like you get shot with like BBs, I think. And
Oh no.
yeah, I don't know if it was BBs or I'm not sure what they were shooting you with, but they were really, I don't know. I think I keep going back and forth on it. Like I think you can chicken out in at least one room and still keep going, but I think if I made the effort to go all the way to LA and try to do 17th door, I would try to get through every room. But the claustrophobia thing is the thing that really freaks me out. Also, and then I'm just thinking about Erebus in Michigan, which is up in the Pontiac area, where they have touch, but it's not people that touch you, it's actual animatronics. So what I remember from going there is they had like this animatronic monkey that would like come out from like behind somewhere, and it would like grab you on your leg and you're like, whoa, what was that? And then they had like they did like a good like distraction thing where you would see like a dinosaur, like random dinosaur, and then all of a sudden like a dinosaur head would come out and like bite your leg or something. So that was another kind of touch I just thought about, which was kind of interesting. I heard that they've been, ever since COVID, they kind of backed away from a lot of the stuff they used to do. But when I went, it was really cool. So that's what I have to remember from. So
Okay.
that's some of the popular ones I can think of around where I live.
All right. Yeah. So anybody listening in the Midwest, now you know where to go if you want this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So now that we've defined the types of touch, let's talk about the psychology of using touch. And fair disclaimer, not a single one of us is a psychologist or trained in psychology in any meaningful way. So, your mileage may vary. In my mind, why would you want to use touch? Well, it adds a layer of fear, right? It's something that people probably aren't going to be expecting. They're going in knowing that they might be touched, but in what way, they're probably not sure. And not only that, but it removes the sense of safety and comfort, I think, right? It's one thing to see this jump scare in front of you, go, yeah, whatever, that was fine, that was cool. But it's another thing for that thing to grab a hold of you. And it takes you off of that level of comfort that you had. What do you guys think? Why would a haunt want to use touch as opposed to just standard jump scares and whatever else?
So I think, I don't know. This is kind of like speculating beyond like this topic, but I feel like with haunts and being an owner or a director, there's this kind of like constant struggle of trying to continuously like harvest fear, right? Like one up yourself each year, or like, okay, everyone's desensitized to this, and this. What else can we do?
The haunt requires fear.
Yeah. And being able to like add like touch as like yet another layer, right? Because if that was something that you kind of seen during the pandemic, right? Of particularly those drive-through haunts or plexiglass haunts, where actors were specifically further away from you and you felt safe within like your bubble. Well, you get rid of that bubble and now you have that like new thing of, oh, this actually could possibly be real, and have that like new like layer of fear as opposed to trying to come up with the next new nightmare. Does that make sense of what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. Yeah, it's you're adding something out of the ordinary rather than trying to make a bigger and better monster.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like I said before, there's haunts out here that'll do it. Like they'll do an upcharge. Like you can have the regular experience, but if you want a more extreme, crazy experience, you can pay $5 extra, and we'll actually touch you. So yeah, it's along the lines of getting that, something different. Being more, I mean, I always thought like touch haunts were, there's only a handful of them, so they're trying to stand out above or be different than the rest, so it's to be unique and whatnot. So because you're used to the the old school walkthrough, and when all of a sudden somebody's touching you, you're not, sometimes you're just not expecting that unless you know in advance. I mean, you should know in advance. They should warn you, but you never know. Some people just don't pay attention, and they'll just go in there and say, well, I just went through the haunt and this guy grabbed me. So, you should have read that disclaimer while you were going through the line. So go ahead. Sorry. I was just
No, you're totally fine. So I actually kind of have a question like for both of you. Did you guys like grow up with this kind of like notion of going through haunted houses and having, either your friends or even having other people being like, well, they can't touch you, it's okay?
Not at all. No.
I grew up with that like all the time of, it's okay to go through this haunted house, the actors can't touch you. And I feel like the touch haunts is like the exact like response to that statement, right? And I've always found it kind of interesting, but yeah, moving and living where I have, I just haven't had a whole lot of exposure to touch haunts, but they've always been kind of definitely an interest of mine to see more and more. It sounds like I have to like visit the Midwest over by Joanna's area. It sounds exciting.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Oh, I was just gonna pretty much agree with you. I mean, I've always heard that, you can go and it's fine. They're not going to touch you. You're safe. I mean, they can't get in your bubble, but it's like some of these haunts, people are getting in your personal bubble, and it's it's kind of terrifying, especially to people that don't like that or have that anxiety about being really close to people. It can be really terrifying for people.
Yeah. So your question about did you grow up with this thing about, oh, they can't touch you, it's fine. No, see, my parents absolutely hate the idea of haunted houses. My mother's terrified of them, and my father thinks they're the dumbest thing on the face of the earth. So I grew up being told by both of my parents that they're going to grab a hold of me, take me back to wherever they're from, and I'll never see my parents again. And it was enough to scare me off haunts until my teenage years.
Oh, no.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's intense.
Yeah, my parents, I'm fucked up because of what my parents did to me as a kid. I had an awkward upbringing, all right?
Well,
Sorry, Bryan.
My parents took me to haunted houses, so I had like the complete opposite here. So when I was little, I started when I was like, I don't even know, 4 or 5. There's a children's museum haunted house, and they kind of went from there to like the bigger stuff. So, yeah, I had a different upbringing, I guess.
I tried to do the opposite with my daughter, and it's not working as well as I've hoped. I've done a pretty good job in helping her get over other fears. Like, we go to theme parks every year, and the first time she went on a big roller coaster, she was absolutely terrified. She was sobbing. But then after that, it was like she wants to ride everything in the park. Not so much with haunted houses. I took her to one 2 years ago. No good. No bueno. And I think it might have been better if, the actors had backed off when I told them, like, all right, back off. But they didn't. So, I don't think she's going to grow into a haunter, which makes me sad. But,
well, going back to touch though, do you guys think that there's like for example, you wouldn't take your daughter to like an extreme haunt for her first haunt,
no.
There's some kind of like, I don't know, like a structure of how to introduce like a, I don't know, 10-year-old or 11-year-old or whatever year old to their first haunt. You definitely wouldn't take them to a touch haunt, but, start them here, and then eventually if they show interest, maybe to the touch haunt, but that might be for regular people too, like, or adults. They might have always went to, non-touch haunts. I mean, I don't know of anybody that started with a touch haunt, which, where do you go once you start at like extreme haunts and then you're like, well, that's my favorite haunt. And then you go to regular haunts and you're like, well,
that sucks.
Yeah. That could be an interesting study though.
That's, oof. I can't imagine the sort of person that would grow up from their early teen years. Let's say your parents take you to a haunt at 13 for your first one, and they take you to like Blackout.
Oh
like, where do you go from there, right?
I know.
I guess you could do the victim experience eventually. I think that's 18 plus. But like, where does it go beyond that? It just doesn't, right? So everything that's not that is just, all right, whatever. It's not scary. I can't imagine what sort of sociopath would grow out of that experience, though.
Exactly.
I think you're assuming, like them actually liking it. It could just be like an absolute aversion of like, no, this is all haunted houses. I do not like haunts.
It could go either way there. There is no in between.
Yeah.
Right.
So what sort of lines do you guys think should never, ever be crossed in a touch haunt, no matter what level, between light touching and extreme haunts? What should never, ever be crossed?
I've talked about it in a previous season, and I don't remember what we were talking about, but I'm really strongly against like scaring, like when it kind of like crosses that threshold between being fun scary and psychologically damaging years of therapy scary. And that line is different for everyone. So it's really kind of hard to like speak in like a majority of like, no, this is a line that shouldn't ever be crossed. And this is exactly where the line is, the line in the sand is.
I think that one's going to be different for every patron too.
Right. Yeah. And so, for me, it's just mostly like extremes. Like you could kind of, think of like extremes that would happen, one of the haunts that I worked for, this doesn't go into touch, but any type of gun violence, like it was just too real. And so they omitted it from the haunt altogether, just because a lot of people have experienced that that were in the area. But I think, again, it depends on who your population is, where you are, current events. But yeah, I've always had it, but it's not really an answer now, is it? So
Not
I'll
really,
stop
no.
talking.
I think one of the things that should never, ever happen when you're dealing directly with a patron. Now, this is something that I think could be addressed if you do it in exactly the right way, and it would take a lot of planning, and it would take a lot of experts in a lot of fields to review and address this sort of scene if you're just doing it for a spectator. But if a patron is taking part, any sort of sexual trauma, I think, needs to be completely avoided. So simulated rape, that sort of thing, when the patron is directly involved, I think should never, ever happen.
Right. So with me, going back to the thing, I think even like as a spectator, so if a patron's not involved, like that would kind of even be my line of having that subject matter. And so it really does go to the individual, because I can like flip flop like both of it of like, okay, never the patron, but then I also like, why would you want to put your actors through that?
It would be actors who would volunteer to say, yes, I am willing to do that scene in that way. It would probably end up being a couple that, is maybe they're married or whatever, right? It would be people who have been naked together and, done the act for real together. I'm not saying that they've raped each other, for the record. I'm just saying that they have sex. Listen, you're listening to an R-rated podcast. Sorry, I can say sex.
At the same time, like I'm thinking about like with touch, like people. I mean, obviously, people can't just go up and grab somebody's balls or something. That's definitely crossing the line. Or like you can't, if you're a guy actor, you can't go up and just grab a woman's boobs. Like that's definitely crossing the line. Like to kind of like getting into that the sexual kind of deal, like any kind of groping is definitely crossing the line, and I've never seen that at a haunt. So I don't want people to listen to this podcast and think that something like that's going to happen, because 100% that's not going to happen if you go to a touch haunt. Like they are very strict on what they're going to be grabbing. So don't worry about it. maybe you can a prop. I mean, if it freaks people out, if you go for it, but you can't grab a real one.
What's that company that makes the sex dolls that look ultra realistic?
Life doll?
Right.
I'm not sure. But there's like they've been in the news before, and it's like there's a company, and I'm pretty sure they're US based, and they make sex dolls that just look incredibly lifelike. Like Uncanny Valley, you can tell something's not quite right, but yeah, if you didn't know any better, you're just like, oh yeah, there's somebody sitting there. What about one of those? Like, my understanding is that they are very, very expensive. But I don't know. Do you think that would be a good investment for a haunt if that's something they wanted to try to depict?
I don't know. I am like leaning so hard to like really, really be modest. Like, I'm like, no, why?
No.
Why is this a thing? And I know I sound that way, and yeah, maybe I am.
You are.
But yeah, like no.
Yeah, it's a line, definitely any sort of like sexual, anything where you're trying to depict that. I don't know. It's a really, really sensitive topic. I've been to a few haunts where they simulate suicide. An actor simulates it. Hoochie was known for doing it. They probably still do it. And it's like one of the first scenes that you walk into.
Yeah, it's the infamous shotgun suicide room.
Yeah. I've seen it locally at Terror Field. They have a scene where you walk into the room and there's a guy sitting on the couch, there's somebody yelling at him, and he pulls the trigger, and I don't think it's quite as loud and realistic as what Hoochie did, because I think Hoochie's just got a much bigger production budget, but Yeah, there's haunts that simulate that. But I think on the flip side, making a patron simulate their own suicide would be a line you would never want to cross. I think that could really fuck someone up.
Would it be any different if, for example, like having patron volunteers? You think?
It would be hard because you would have to find out before you go into that show who's willing to do this sort of thing. Right. There may be some people who during that time would go, sure, I'm willing to do that. I know that it's all fake. I know that I'm going to walk out just fine on the other end of all this. But in the heat of it, that attitude may change, especially considering what else has happened in the show already. And you never know. I think it's something that would have to be approached incredibly delicately. The same thing with like simulated homicide by a patron, right? It's one thing to have two actors who do a scene where one of them kills the other, whatever. There's a movie about extreme haunts. I can't think of the name of it right now, but basically the plot of the movie is this girl who's going through some mental health issues, depression, anxiety, that sort of thing. And she comes across this thing online for an extreme haunt, and she thinks, that's what I need. Yeah, you're already suicidal, so, what you need is somebody to beat the shit out of you and do all this crazy stuff to you and fuck you up more. Totally makes sense, right? So I think part of, like, what her mental health problems were, where they stem from, was, like, she had some daddy issues, and, like, her father had abused her when she was younger, whatever. I don't recall the plot exactly, but... So she goes and she pays to do this extreme haunt, and she shows up to this abandoned warehouse, and I think everybody knows what they're trying to depict or what experience they're trying to depict there. We're not talking about them. I've already decided we're not going to talk about them at all. But so, like, she goes in and, she does the typical, like, extreme haunt stuff, like the cattle prod, the simulated drowning, whatever. And then so at some point they, like, throw a sack over her head, throw her in the back of a pickup truck, and they take her out to this frozen lake because they're supposed to be in, like, Minnesota in January or something. So they go out there, she's out there with a couple of the actors, and at one point, like, she's given this prop gun, and one of the actors is telling her to, like, kill the other guy or something, and if you're looking at all of this from above, it's a fully scripted scene. It's a scene where, like, this was what the haunt wanted her to do. So she does it. She pulls the trigger, and, the squib pack goes off, and he dies, and then so the other actor's like, oh my god, I can't believe you fucking killed him, blah, 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 right? And so, like, then she finds her way back to this haunt, and then she finds that actor, and he's, like, taking the squib packs off, and she's like, holy shit, I didn't actually kill you? And it's this whole thing, and then she ends up actually killing everybody inside. If I can think of the name, which I will think of it after we're done recording, as is tradition.
I think that escalated really quickly.
Yeah, no, and then it's like at the end of it all, she realizes her father was a part of all this too. It's super fucked up.
Is it Haunt from 2019? It sounds familiar. I feel like I've seen this movie.
You might have, yeah.
I mean, I've seen I watch a lot of movies, but that sounds so familiar. It might be that, but I've seen so many movies that, like, I kind of look for movies that are about haunted attractions because I love haunted attractions. So it sounds like that plot, but I might be putting two movies together because
I can't think of the name of it. I will figure it out. Like I said, as is tradition, I'll think of it after we're done recording.
Yeah.
So nobody listening will have any idea what I'm talking about. And that whole thing that I just went on for like 5 minutes, everybody's going to be like, what the fuck is Bryan on? We don't know. All right. If you know, contact us. You've got our details.
Yeah. Comment below.
But yeah, so my point is that, like, this simulated homicide, like, it really fucked this girl up in the movie. And, like, there's some people out there that just absolutely dream of being able to kill another person. I'm not going to get political. I'm not going to tell you what professions you should pursue. I think you already know. You're probably already working in one of them. But yeah, I don't think it's something that a haunt should do because it's going to fuck people up really good.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to, like, what I was talking about of doing psychological terror damage versus fun terror damage. It's just, You could find different subject matter.
And there's a haunt around here that I just thought of another one because a lot of people think of like the gun suicide or whatever, but there's a haunt around here that's famous for doing a simulated witch hanging, and they actually have it's a whole thing where, they don't actually hang a person, but I think they wear like a harness, so whenever it looks like they're being hung or hanged, or I don't know what the proper term of it is, but they
hanged.
Okay. So they actually looks like a person is being hanged, and it looks real, but it's not. I think they just reset, and the person just, I don't know what happened. I've never been to that haunt, but I've just heard of it. So that's one of the things that they're famous for. So
Okay.
that's another one. That's another option of things that could be a simulated homicide.
All right. What about safe words? Do you think that safe words need to be used, and at what level of interaction do you need to have a safe word?
So I feel like very, very conservative with this topic, apparently, but I feel like safe words are always very helpful. I know even in like non-touch haunt situations, there are haunts where you could opt out by saying a safe word, right? I worked at a couple of them that if you said a specific word, and the actors would freely give you like this word, particularly if you were like really like freaked out and like not able to pursue, the actors would be like, okay, like say this as you're going through the haunt, and then the other actors won't jump out at you. But that's a no-touch haunt situation. So I would feel you would kind of have the same thing in like any level of touch haunt that you have, of allowing patrons to like kind of opt out, even though it was something that they signed up for and they thought they were okay with. Because thinking that you're okay with something and actually being okay with it is two different like things, right?
Yes.
So I would like safe words like all along, except you guys probably disagree.
Yeah. For that one haunt, like I mentioned earlier, they have the glow stick that you wear around your neck. Like if it's too intense, you just take it off, and that's your safe word. Like it's enough. But yeah, most haunts, they might think that the safe words is "I want more" or something, because they might not actually use a safe word, and they might. You just never know. So. Like, I think that glow, even though that glow stick is so annoying because it throws me off going through a dark haunt, and then they can see that that person actually wants to be touched, though. So, yeah, some haunts will say, well, the safe word doesn't exist, and you paid, you're going to go through and get but they have to have some kind of. These places, maybe they even have like a chicken exit. Like if you had enough, you can go out the chicken exit. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. And I think a lot of haunts have, their own, sort of chicken exits. For the record, I did find the name of this movie. It is called Extremity.
Oh. Okay.
So anybody listening, go watch Extremity. It's a pretty good movie. The writing could be better, I think. It's a little hard to follow, but not bad if you're into the whole extreme haunt sort of thing.
Is it a B movie? Would you call it a B movie?
Not really.
The inflection says yes.
It strikes me more as like a direct-to-TV sort of a movie. Like it's that level of production. So
yes.
It's not a movie that I would go see in the theater. But it's the sort of movie that I would see like in the discount bin at Walmart. Yeah, it's probably a B movie.
Did you see this on Lifetime Movie Network?
Yeah.
Because that's what it's sounding like now.
It is.
Yes, with Valerie, Bert, and Ernie. Coming this fall to Lifetime, starring Valerie, Bert, and Ernie. All men are bad and will hurt you. So, does no actually mean no in every circumstance? What do you think?
Me? Yes. Again, I feel
it should be.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know. I feel patrons who are going through, like, I understand, like, they sign up for X, Y, and Z, but I always feel like they should have some type of, like, back out clause, right? Like, some way to simply say, like, no, or to be pulled out of the show, or to, you know, like, not be touched or whatever. Like, there has to be something, like,
And I think
forcing
that's where safe
somebody
words come in, right?
Yeah, forcing somebody to go through something like that when they're at their threshold, you know, like that. Again, it goes back to the thing of, like, okay, now you are psychologically torturing and scaring this person. It's not fun anymore.
So let me ask you a question. Let's say you have an extreme haunt. They've given you your safe word. It's banana, whatever it may be, right? Let's say you're waterboarding this person, right? And they're laying on the table, the cloth over their face. You're dripping water, pouring water, whatever, and they're screaming no. Do you stop? Because they haven't said their safe word. They know their safe word.
I would. I don't know. I think that's, like, kind of like the thing too is I would, but I also, like, never signed up for, like, the more extreme, like, victim kind of experience type of thing. So I could also see of, like, no, like, we paid for this, and obviously I am going to go ahead and say no, and I'm not tapping out because I didn't say the safe word. With me, because I am that person, and I will most likely never go through a victim experience type of haunt. I would as an actor, but again,
That's a tough one, right?
Yeah, I feel like I'm definitely on, like, the softer side of this, because I really do feel, again, adamant about there's a fun scary, and then there's, like, we are doing years of damage type of scary. Like,
I think when you sign up for the extreme haunts, you know that you're getting into the years of damage level of scary.
Yeah, I don't know. It goes
so-
into, like, rather you should be even, like, a shepherd for that person of, like, are you really sure? I know you signed up for this, but come on.
So
sure.
what if let me walk you through some proposals here, and maybe some haunts are already doing this. I'm not sure. I don't do this sort of thing. I value my life. So, what if before the show starts, you sit down with the patron and you make sure that they fully understand that even if they're screaming no, they're not going to stop. You have to say the safe word. Do you think that's okay?
No.
No?
Yeah.
What if...
I just would be uncomfortable. Like, I'm trying to put myself in as an actor, and I'm trying to put myself in as a patron. So as a patron, if I am screaming no because my brain just blitzed out on whatever the safe word is, like, I would want them to stop.
Understandable. What if they did a reverse safe word? So,
like an apple? Like,
no, okay. So a safe word. So, like, in the BDSM community, like, a safe word is basically a word you say to make the other person stop whatever it is they're doing because you're not comfortable anymore, right? That's like within the fetish and kink communities. You see that within extreme haunts. You see that. What if you flip it around? Somebody has to say a specific keyword that is totally out of context, would not be said normally during this experience, that says, yes, you're allowed to do this thing to me now. So instead of banana being the no stop sort of word, banana is the please go ahead word.
So I think my issue, even like with words and stuff like that, right, is like, you're relying a lot on like the actors. Like, okay, the patron has to say the word clearly, or it honestly does depend on the word though. But like, I know that in the haunt, again, like working in a haunt, there's so many other sounds and noises. Patrons could have said whatever, and I just would repeat what I thought that I heard, right? Like, when I was like mimicking them or saying like their names, I was absolutely wrong about, 25% of the time. And particularly in this scenario that we're talking about, like extreme haunts and touch and, patron consent and all this other stuff. Like, you don't want that up to interpretation. Like, I don't want to be 25% wrong of somebody like either wanting, like increasing the contact or the intensity or decreasing it and stopping completely. Like, I honestly, what Joanna was talking about with like the glow stick, I'm like, yeah, like that's the way to do it. Like something physical, like I'm done. Like, let's go ahead and take this like rag and like throw it on the ground type of thing. Like, I'm done.
Throw in the towel.
I like that. Now let's say somebody has just become completely unresponsive during one of these experiences. They haven't shown that like they're enthusiastic to keep going, but they also haven't expressed that they want to stop. What should a haunt be looking for? What should that staff be looking for to just completely stop the show? Is it just the fact that they're totally unresponsive?
I mean, yeah. Like, it depends on, like, I'm not even going to go into, like, how unresponsive, right? Like, I mean...
I'm not talking about knocked out. Like, obviously, right? Yeah, you're going to stop there, but, like, they're just kind of like a blank mold and just, like, taking it, right? Because I served time in the military. I know a lot of guys who have mastered that 1,000-yard stare. We can get screamed at by the angriest sergeant major on the face of the earth, and it's not going to phase a single one of us because, like, we know how to just completely look past all of that and just let it go right past us. So what about somebody who's kind of in that state? Like, do you stop then? Or is this just kind of their way of coping with the situation? Like, they don't really care if you stop or not, but this is how they get through it.
This is where, if you're talking about extreme haunts and extreme touching and all this other stuff, like, I mean, this is the kind of stuff I would like to, like, unwrap during that, like, consent. Like, hey, let's sit down and talk about this a bit. This is what you're signing up for, like that type of thing. Because, like, again, as, like, if I was working a haunt, I would like to know that and not just assume.
Okay.
That's, like, kind of what's going on. Because, again, like, you could have somebody in shock, and that would be kind of, like, the same reaction. Like, sometimes, like, shock does manifest in, like, some type of, like, physical, something observable, right? Like, physically observable. But sometimes shock literally is just like, boom, like just turning off the lights. And, I mean, that's the thing is like, is it something that like, nope, I signed up for this. I want to see if I could kind of like tolerate this type of thing. Or are you, again, damaging that person? And I don't think that there's a way to like assume or just magically know that kind of threshold where, and this would make me a horrible actor in this scenario, which is again why I'm not a part of these haunts. I don't sign up for this. But I mean, I would constantly be breaking my character in the haunt to be like, are you okay, yo? Like, you seem to be really bothered by this. I would be the worst, like haunted house worker in like an extreme haunt setting.
I think you've described why none of us here are billionaires, and it's because we have this thing called empathy.
Right.
Like, I'm with you. Like, I don't, like, at a certain point, I don't think I could just keep inflicting this trauma on somebody who's not, super enthusiastic about it, right? If I'm getting that feedback that, like, they totally want me to keep going, like, all right, sure, let's keep doing this because you're obviously having a good time. But, it's like you carry that into the business world, and it's like if you look at all the richest CEOs, they're just complete sociopaths because it doesn't bother them to fire people who are at the lowest point of their lives. They don't care that, Joe Blow, the coder, now doesn't have a job and can't feed his family, and they're going to be homeless, and his kids are going to get taken by the state. Like, what does he fucking care? It saved him $10. You know what I mean? So it's... I think because we're not sociopaths, we can't fully understand like where these lines need to be drawn.
I'm going back to kind of where you draw the line and everything. I've been to some haunts where, I've seen touch haunts and there's been like 18-year-olds, teenage kids, not probably around the 18-ish, maybe even drunk people that go through haunts, and they try to go through and they're like, oh, this isn't really scary. You can't touch me. And they say stupid stuff like that. And that might cause the actors to kind of amp up their show a little bit more just to show them, I can touch you. This is what I can do. And I've seen moments where people have been like pushed a little harder than they should because the actors are kind of annoyed by these people that go through. And I mean, even they go through regular haunts, like inebriated, or like the guy that's trying to show off in front of his girlfriend, they're like, well, this isn't really scary. They can touch you, but it's not scary. And they might even grab a little harder than usual, So I have seen, that's just an experience I've seen before at some of these touch haunts that they might like boost up their show a little bit more if people are kind of the patrons are fighting back, which they shouldn't be, but but yeah, I mean, these touch haunts, they're very adamant that we can touch you, you can't touch back. And if a patron does do something, like I've heard of people getting punched, I mean, all kinds of stuff, because they're just not expecting to be touched. It might be a natural reflex or something, reflex. So they might like get grabbed and they like, go slap them back. And then you're like, well, you're out of the haunt. You can't do that here. You can't hurt our actors, because the actors are, important part of that show. I mean, haunt is nothing without their actors. So they got to be careful. And I can tell you that our haunt, the haunt that I worked at, they made sure that the guys that worked there wore cups, because if they didn't, I mean, there's been people that have fought back, like when they got grabbed, because it was that reflex that they were like, what? I'm getting grabbed, so they might kick them in the groin and they would get really hurt. So they had to wear cups.
I actually never really thought about that because, again, I've only worked for like no contact, no touch haunts. And I mean, we still get punched. We still get shoved around as actors. And that's really kind of normal. But yeah, I could totally see in like a touch contact haunt situation like that be more canon, right? Like this is an everyday thing, almost guaranteed multiple times a night, to like where you actually have to, like what you were saying of like all the guys wearing cups and whatnot. I'm like, oh wow. And then I'm like, no, it tracks.
So moving along, the controversy of touching, what sort of things might stop a haunt from touching their patrons, right? Insurance is going to be one of them. Whatever policy they carry or whatever insurance agency they're using may tell them, we're not going to cover you if you touch your customers, right? And it also may come down to local laws and regulations. It may be, something that a certain town says, yeah, you can set up a haunted house, but here's the things you can't do. I think those are going to be like the biggest reasons that stop a haunt, although it doesn't stop all of them. Waivers. What should be in a waiver? What sort of major talking points do you think should be in there?
It really, again, depends on what the show itself is, but kind of like what we were touching about of like what lines shouldn't be crossed. Anything that's like approaching a line or those lines should be like, hey, kind of like the litany of stuff that you see of like, this show has strobe lights and loud music and sometimes like simulated X, Y, and Z. Stuff like that I feel like should be in a waiver to like give people's like patrons a heads up of like what they're heading into. I think like when you go into the topic of like touching and contact, like it gets kind of harder because again, like emphasizing like the actors will touch you, and we even talked about like there's different like levels of touch. And I have a feeling like even if you had that in a waiver, like it should absolutely be in a waiver, but if you have it in a waiver and just have it as a statement of like actors will touch you, like I don't think that's enough. I think
it needs to tell you how they're going to touch you.
Yeah. Like examples of, okay, this might happen. Kind of the same thing where I was just talking about having a litany of okay, we have like this scene, this topic, that type of thing.
What about a disclosure? Do you think that, like a disclosure on a website or on a sign at the property, what sort of things do you think they need to say other than you may or you will be touched? Do you think like they need to go into the different ways you're going to be touched in that sort of thing?
So disclosures are really hard for me. Again, because if you have it on the website, there's a possibility that, patrons never visit the website. If you have it like posted at the haunt, there's a possibility that patrons never read it. I've seen disclosures like printed on tickets as kind of like a way of like, well, I mean, it was on your ticket. And by, using this ticket in order to get into the haunt, like you consented that you've read this disclosure. But because of like the nature of it being overlooked as opposed to something like you're signing or you force patrons to sign, I mean, ideally in a perfect world, you would want like the same information in a waiver in your disclosure, but your disclosure tends to be a lot shorter. So it's hard. I would want the same thing that I would have in a waiver, but I don't know how to make it shorter.
Well,
I'd have a 9-page disclosure. That's basically where I'm getting at.
So in my mind, the waiver is going to say things like, you're going to be touched. These are the different ways you're going to be touched. And then here's all the legal jargon that says you're not going to sue us because of that. Right. So if you get hurt on our property because of whatever reason, because we slapped you, we electrocuted you, whatever, you're not going to sue us because this is what you signed up for. The disclosure, in my mind, basically just says you're going to be touched. You might be touched in these ways.
So you would only want to mention like touch, not like contact or like touch situations that we kind of like talked about before.
Well, I think the disclosure could say the different ways. Like it could read something like, by purchasing a ticket, you agree, or, you will be touched, and you're going to be touched in these ways. It may be electrocution, it may be simulated drowning, it may be open-handed slapping, it may be hair pulling, it might be these things. Mm-hmm. But I think it should tell you some of the different ways, or all of the different ways that they're going to contact you.
Right.
The waiver in my mind is more of the legal contract that you sign. You say, I'm not going to sue you because of these things. And it spells it out very explicitly. The disclosure, the disclaimer, basically just says, hey, you're going to be touched, okay? It's them telling you this is what's going to happen. The waiver is you agreeing to it. So do you think people really want these high levels of touch? Like, Haunted Hoochie level or...
yes.
Extreme haunt level.
They're really popular. I mean, any extreme or extreme-ish or grabbing haunt around here is always very busy. And I've been to Haunted Hoochie on busy nights, or the busiest nights, like Saturdays. You can't even. I mean, they're 4 or 5 hour waits, so you have to. Just advice: if you ever go to Haunted Hoochie, go on a Thursday or buy a fast pass. Or buy a fast pass on a Thursday, because you don't want to wait in line. You'll be waiting in line for a long time. So they're actually only open Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, not open on Sundays. So if you go, definitely, if you want to try a general admission on Thursday, go for it. You probably will still have to wait at least 1 or 2 hours, but definitely go either Thursday, but always buy a fast pass. Invest in it. But any of these haunts that I know of, I mean, people talk about it because it's something different. I mean, there's and a lot of people will do that upgrade. They offer an upgrade, and then there's haunts that don't touch, but then they'll have a night where they do touch. Like it'll be like they might do the regular show until about 11, and then from 11 to 1 they say, well, we're going to touch and make it R-rated, or even more extreme than R, or whatever they say. And then, they'll be, there's always a long line. So I think they're very popular. I mean, it's something for people that's unique and for people to talk about.
Terror Field does that, where one night during the regular season, basically, I think it's their final night of the season, actually. They close kind of early, and then after that, it's extreme night. Or they do it like immediately after their regular season, whatever it is. But yeah, it's like you sign a waiver, you basically agree to get tied up, bag thrown over your head, and all that cornstarch blood poured on you.
Oh yeah.
So don't wear any clothes that you care about.
See, the only like example that I could think of like out in my area, again, I don't have that many contact haunts. I have two. Is that the one haunt that I was talking about that does those like wrestling kind of holds and moves. They ended up hosting a burlesque show. And so it was still full contact haunt, just burlesque. And like it's interesting, but it wasn't, again, obviously, like it wasn't more extreme than like what their normal show is in context. And so when both of you are talking about like, oh yeah, like there's some nights that haunts out here go ahead and, you know, they'll have their regular show and then later at night or on another day have like a more extreme contact show. I'm like, that's really interesting.
I want to clarify, I didn't actually mean Terror Field, not the one here in New York. Field of Screams is actually what I was thinking of in PA. I don't want to misrepresent what anybody's doing. I don't want people to think that there's like, oh yeah, this great show and they do this extreme night. No, it's in Pennsylvania. It's in the middle of fucking nowhere, Pennsylvania too. So I think that explains a lot of it. It's letting those hillbillies kind of get that aggression out.
Yeah, the haunt that I'm thinking about here is the USS Nightmare in Newport, Kentucky, because they always do just a regular show, non-touch or anything. But for one night, it's always like at the end of the season, they do this, all right, they do an extreme tour. It's called the Captain's Extreme Tour because it's actually on a boat. It's on a haunted boat. And, you know, they have this extreme tour, and I've actually done it a few times. And it's definitely, to sound weird, I like their extreme tour. It's really neat. I've heard people say more crazy things, but then they saw actually that their extreme tour is popular. So during the regular season, they actually implement some of their extreme show. It's not as extreme as the extreme night, and I can't talk about it because I want people to go and check it out themselves if they can. But they have an RIP experience during the regular season where you can upgrade to get a better experience. You might be like separated from your group, kind of, it's more intense, but you know, they found out that, you know, people want this extreme stuff, so they actually put it in the regular season. So it might be not as crazy as their extreme night when they have the full scale extreme night, but they have little bits and pieces in there. So they're actually able to make more money because, like, I know their RIP, which was the little bit, not the extreme tour, but if you want to do that add-on, I mean, they're making more money from people. They see that they can do that, so that kind of helps. So that might be an incentive for haunters to, you know, if they see that the extreme night, where it's not like an extreme on our scale of extreme, but if they implement that grabbing and they're a little bit more crazy on one night and they're really successful, maybe they can find out how they can add it to their haunt somehow and do that RIP kind of upgrade. So.
Okay. Well, I think that's about all we've got for this episode. Do you guys have any closing thoughts?
Nope. I wish I had something interesting. I don't.
I mean, I think in the long run, I feel that haunts are kind of, it's a mix. I don't think they're as intense with the grabbing and the touching as they used to be because of COVID. When COVID happened, all the grabbing haunts said no. I mean, they took it away. Now they're trying to put them back in, and it's not as intense as it used to be, I think. But there's still going to be haunts out there that are going to be wanting to try it. And, you know, I just feel like it's just some of these grabbing or touching haunts is unique and they're trying to stand out besides other people. So that's what I think. I just think that some of the haunts that, used to grab, they don't do it as much. But, I mean, if people miss it, they can go out and find it.
All right. Well, that's all we've got for this week, folks. Thank you so much for listening. If you're just now tuning in, you missed the whole show. I don't know where the hell you've been for the last hour. This is all pre-recorded. This isn't a live thing. If this is the first time you're listening, make sure you hit that subscribe button on whatever platform you're on. We're on Spotify, Buzzsprout. Tiphennie, what else are we on?
I don't know.
Deezer?
I know like Stitcher.
We're on something like D's Nuts or something.
Sure. Yeah.
YouTube, maybe?
Not YouTube. Not yet. Anyway, we haven't found a good way to do that one. If you're listening on YouTube, who the fuck uploaded this? Report that asshole. Because we sure as hell didn't. Make sure you head on over to thescarefactor.com and check out the merchandise section. You can head on over to our store. You can buy a onesie with a Skelegore logo on it. That would be a lot of fun, wouldn't it? You could dress your baby up with the Team Skelegore logo. You can buy a whole bunch of stuff with the Team Zombillies logos on it. You can buy stuff with the Team Techies logo on it. You can buy something just not from our store that just says "I Heart Tiphennie." I don't know why you'd want to.
Yeah,
I think that I think everyone's going to get that shirt this year. BDS. Expect that.
I was gonna say my daughter has a Team Zombie shirt and she's 4, so I got to get that onesie though for my son though. Yeah, he's 4 months.
Yeah, you got to get the onesie. I'm pretty sure we sell onesies.
Yeah, they do.
I don't know. Yeah. You could buy like a hat or like a coffee mug. You can buy all sorts of really cool stuff from the store, and it helps us do what we do here, especially putting on the Bryan Show. I mean, the Scare Factor podcast. If you have any comments, make sure you put them in whatever comment section on whatever platform you're listening on. Make sure you praise Tiphennie and Joanna for not having the same opinions as me. Make sure you berate me as a human being and make me feel bad and make me want to quit this podcast. It's not going to happen, but you can try. I welcome it. I think I'm rambling again, so thank you for liking, commenting, and subscribing. And until next time, stay scary.